The first pick in the upcoming NFL draft. If he is, he would be the second oldest quarterback ever to be drafted number 1 overall. Dan Graziano, who was the oldest quarterback at the time of being drafted number 1 overall?
So he's a Heisman Trophy winner who's probably going to go number 1 overall to the Cincinnati Bengals.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of somebody else who fit that description. I'm going to say it's Carson Palmer.
Well, it's a really good guess.
But I'm wrong?
You're wrong.
Oh.
It was a Heisman Trophy winner.
He was, and he was 23.
It was Vinny Testaverde.
Oh,
who was 23.
Well done,
The
sir.
celebration is on.
Well done.
In Hembo headquarters. But I tell you what, the mano a mano between Graziano and Hembo is worth the price of admission every single day. Laura.
Yeah, Himbo got really nervous there. All right, so we just talked about it. Joe Burrow seems to have solidified the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. But the question is, will that pick be made by the Bengals? This week, Bengals Director of Player Personnel, Duke Tobin, said in an ESPN report that the team won't trade the number 1 pick and was, quote, news to him. So basically, I kind of messed that up, but basically what he's saying is that it was news to him that people would say that they would even trade that number 1 pick or that they wouldn't either way. Let's just actually get to the bottom of it.
That sums up the draft.
They don't want to, exactly. The draft is confusing and crazy, but what are you hearing about whether or not the Bengals would hold on to that pick or might be interested in somebody offering them something that would make them trade it?
Somebody once told me the draft is the worst time to be a reporter because anyone who's telling you something that's true doesn't want you to report it, and anyone who's telling you something they want you to report is lying to you. So there's no way to know what's real and what's not. Look, you're going to hear it's 3 more months. You're going to hear everything. Is it conceivable that the Dolphins could move up to any pick they want? Yes, they have 3 first-round picks. Hey, Bengals, you can have all 3 of them. We love this guy that much. And how could the Bengals say no to a thing like that? Why would Duke Tobin close anything off and say, no way, we're not trading it? Because you want to leave yourself available for the best possible offer. It's 3 months. We're going to hear a lot of stuff. My expectation, the expectation of the people I'm talking to, is that it's Burrow, number 1, to the Bengals. But a lot can happen in 3 months, and a lot will be thrown out there, crazy scenarios, all kinds of stuff.
This choice, I mean, I look forward to the crazy scenarios, and I've been surprised by drafts before. Baker Mayfield jumps to mind, and I guess also Lamar falling as late as he did. So I'm not saying it's out of the question, but this decision has already been made for them. Like, this is what you get fired off of. If you don't draft this guy right now, and even if he goes somewhere else and is mediocre, you can't not draft the Heisman Trophy winner who's had the best season that a passing quarterback has had, and he's from Ohio. Like, you can't pass this up, or the decision's made for you.
And listen, it sounds logical, right? It sounds like common sense, but common sense isn't common, and we've seen that before. I mean, I was sitting here after Deshaun Watson put on one of the greatest displays in college football playoff history, and I'm like, well, they got to draft this guy. But you know what they do? The Chicago Bears move up to get Mitchell Trubisky, and then the next 2 guys are Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. So I believe people talk themselves into and out of a lot of things, and they're going to find a way to get into the conversation to see what they could get for someone wanting Burrow.
This guy is different, though, because Joe Burrow does all the things that they want to see someone do, and he is all the things that most quarterbacks, most NFL teams want their quarterbacks to be. There are a lot of other reasons. Like, Deshaun Watson was not incredibly accurate. He even made misreads on coverages in that big game when he played well. When you watch that, you see it, you're like, hey, maybe not. But you see Joe Burrow, he looks like an NFL quarterback. He talks like an NFL quarterback. He throws like an NFL quarterback. They're not going to talk themselves out of Joe Burrow.
Here's one difference between him and Mitchell Trubisky. It wasn't a one-year wonder. We got to see him the year before, and you were wondering if he could play football.
That was
and
the
so
wonder.
I think, and Mike Tannenbaum said himself, he needs to answer the question, why weren't you better your junior year?
Let me answer the question with a question. Laura Rutledge, who is universally considered by almost everyone to be the best player in this year's draft?
Chase Young.
Chase Young.
And
if there is a scenario that the Bengals, and Chase Young, who is the pass rusher extraordinaire out of Ohio State, which also, by the way, is awfully close to Cincinnati. If there is a scenario where the Bengals can get themselves Chase Young and one of the big quarterbacks, whether they decide they want to roll the dice on Tua Tagovailoa or if they should talk themselves into Justin Herbert, then in my opinion, it makes all the sense in the world. It depends on how far you think the separation is between Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa. Because if Tua wasn't hurt, I think half the teams in the NFL might consider taking him ahead of Burrow now.
That's super logical, and I think if you want to build a team, a championship team, you're probably better off trying to get more players rather than less. But the problem is you cannot pass on Joe Burrow and have him be even mediocre somewhere else.
Why?
Because what happens? You get fired for that because everyone in this league is looking for quarterbacks. I understand the logic behind that. Like Charlie Casserly pops up in my mind where he decided to go Mario Williams over Reggie Bush. That was the right decision, but it ultimately led to him getting fired. fired because it seemed like the obvious choice, and then Reggie went on and was okay elsewhere. This is what happens. If he goes on, if you pass on a franchise quarterback, I don't care what other players you get. The fans will turn on you, the media turn on you, and then your job is gone.
The other quarterback that is in the mix here is Justin Herbert, who the Bengals have been interested in before, and you just wonder if they talk themselves into him potentially with a package deal with Chase Young. Either way, I think the Dolphins are the
y'all
most
know how I feel about Joe Burrow. I believe that it's possible, and I believe that this is a conversation.
What's possible? I'm
I
sorry.
believe that it's possible that they pass on Joe Burrow and go in a different direction if they could get Chase Young and one of these other quarterbacks. When you start to watch the film and when they start to break things down, you can talk yourself into any scenario you want to.
They won't do it.
Yeah, well, listen, a quarterback went #1 last year, and Nick Bosa went #2. One of them is playing in the Super Bowl this week, okay? And it's the guy that can rush
Murray hasn't been
I'm
bad
just
for
saying.
1 year.
He's been good.
I am merely saying, if they can get Chase Young and a quarterback, then it makes all the sense.
Okay, I understand, but pulling that out, Greeny, that's.
Let's get to
It's his show.
That's what I do. All right, let's talk about the Baseball Hall of Fame. Derek Jeter yesterday came one vote shy of joining his former teammate Mariano Rivera as the only unanimous Hall of Fame selections, but he's in. The captain got 99.75% of the votes, highest ever for a position player. Of course he's in the Hall of Fame, and so is Larry Walker. Congratulations to him. He's the only other player to get voted in this year. It was his final year on the ballot. He becomes the first Rockies player ever to make the Hall of Fame. And so people wonder, how about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens? Each of them got over 60% of the votes in their 8th year on the ballot. Some were expecting a big jump for the duo. However, they only increased by about 1.5%. And so people want to know what's going to become of those guys. And here is one of our favorite voters. Timmy Kirchin is with us. Tim, you vote for both Bonds and Clemens. We see where they are both sitting. I want to ask you, in light of all of the conversation about cheating in the sport of baseball right now with the Astros, do you believe that will ultimately change the dynamic for Bonds or Clemens to make it in one way or the other?
I don't think so, Greeny. I don't see a strong connection between the sign stealing scandal and the steroid scandal. I don't see Bonds and Clemens getting a huge spike now because everyone is looking and saying, well, those guys were cheating over there. There's a strong faction of voters for the Hall of Fame who say, if you have a connection to PEDs, you're not getting in no matter what. And they've held pretty firm on that, even though Bonds and Clemens have gone from 36% to 60% in 8 years. But to get that final 15%, it's been done before, but not with guys who have this kind of baggage with the voters. So I don't think there's a strong connection, but we'll find out next year because it's not a good year for first-time Hall of Famers next year.
Quickly, I have to follow up here, and I'm sorry, guys, but it just occurred to me. So a guy like Carlos Beltran is now mixed up in this cheating scandal. It is directly cheating, which in theory so are steroids. If you're going to keep Bonds and Clemens out of the Hall of Fame, does a guy like Carlos Beltran, does a guy like Altuve eventually, do they wind up suffering that same fate?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a different scandal, but it's the same idea. If, say, Carlos Beltran is a borderline Hall of Famer, which I think he is, the voters are going to look at him at that time and say, all right, this is not steroids, but it's cheating in some form. I'm going to hold that against him and keep him out. That's how I think they are going to look at similar yet different.
All right, Timmy, sit with me a minute. I want to come back to you, but I want to bring Graziano into this because many of you may not know because you associate him with football with us. You covered baseball for years. You are a Baseball Hall of Fame voter, and you do not vote for Bonds or Clemens, is my understanding. Does the Astros thing in any way impact your thinking?
On Bonds and Clemens?
Yes.
No, I don't think it changes it at all. Like, if I'm still voting, and it's been a while since I covered, so I'm still voting on guys I covered, but that won't always be true. If I were still voting at the time the likes of, Beltran and Altuve and those guys came up, I'd have to assess that separately. But no, it does not make me think just because, there's a whole bunch of cheating going on, it's okay, the cheating these guys did, and I'm over that. I've held firm on that, as Tim has said, and I don't see any reason.
I've wondered for a long time, when Bonds and Clemens get to their final year, as Walker did this year, which means 2 years from now, I'm guessing that some people will say, okay, we made them wait it out as long as we could, but we will ultimately put them in. How will you vote in their 10th year?
I would think I'm still a no if I still have to vote at that point, but yeah, I think the key thing to understand is there's not some meeting where everybody decides how we're all going to vote as a block. Everybody makes their own individual decision, and sometimes those do change year to year. But for me, I don't see anything changing in my mind between now and 2 years from now when I'd have to make that decision.
Okay, that's fair. Now I want to get Timmy back in because as we follow this Astros cheating story the past couple of weeks, yesterday we heard from the owner of the team, Jim Crane. He was named Executive of the Year at the Houston Sports Awards last night, and he had this to say.
When we get down to spring training, we'll all get them together, and they'll come out with a strong statement as a team, and I think, apologize for what happened, and we'll move forward. We're going to sit in a room and talk about it, and then we're going to come out and address the press. All of them will address the press, either as a group or individually. We'll have some, quite frankly, we'll apologize for what happened and ask for forgiveness and move forward.
That was very interesting to me, Tim Kirchin, because Buster was on yesterday talking about how a lot of people around baseball were put off and surprised by how defiant the few comments we've heard from the Astros players thus far have been. What do you make of what Jim Crane said there?
Well, I heard the same thing that Buster heard. People told me in the game that this was the arrogance of the Astros on display again. But Jim Crane is upset, and he should be. He's embarrassed, and he should be. He was very assertive, very direct, and very blunt in firing his manager and his general manager, and he's not going to let the Astro players get away with just reading from a statement, as Alex Bregman did. There's going to have to be more contrition shown here, and they're going to have to do it right off the top in spring training and explain a few things. Otherwise, this is going to be a story that lingers the entire season.
All right, Timmy, well done. Thank you so much, as always, for your perspective, and we'll see you soon. Meanwhile, we'll take a short break here. Coming up, what does the Astros sign stealing have to do with Patrick Mahomes? Well, nothing, unless you're following Ryan Clark's Twitter feed. He will explain his tweets coming up. And then Zion's debut is just hours away, and he's making a big change to try to avoid another injury. What is it? Will it make a difference? We'll answer those questions and more. Let's get up on ESPN.